Case Study Part 3. What every single godly man wants. The previous chapter revealed that every single godly woman wants a mighty man of valor, who has eyes only for her, who unconditionally favors her, who comforts her, who converses with her, who protects her, and who provides for her. Boaz was that kind of man. Now in this third part of the case study, the focus will turn to the kind of woman a godly man wants. Tucked away halfway through this third chapter, Boaz testifies of Ruth with a profound admiration. He says, "All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character." I want to suggest from that statement by Boaz that the kind of woman that every single godly man wants is a woman of noble character like Ruth. The New International Version uses the expression woman of noble character to describe the quality that Ruth possessed. The King James used the expression virtuous woman to describe her character. Other translations call her a woman of excellence or an honorable woman or some other positive expression like those. All the translations attempt to render that same Hebrew description of her. This Hebrew expression is best rendered woman of virtue. This expression is very similar to that which the divine caseworker interrupted the second chapter to tell us about Boaz. Boaz was called a mighty man of valor. Both the words valor and virtue translate the same Hebrew word. The fact that the divine caseworker used the same Hebrew word for both is enlightening. Both have the same qualities, one in the male gender and one in the female gender. You see, when the term is used with the male gender, it is rendered mighty man of valor. Now, when it is used with the female gender, it is rendered woman of virtue. But in reality, the terms are the same and the quality they possess is the same. Valor and virtue are the same internal qualities of an overcomer. Now, with this in view, an important principle may be stated. Every single man and woman listening to me is looking for a person of valor or virtue. So what if when you find that person of valor or virtue, they don't find you to be one? Once I was at lunch with two single friends of mine who were, as guys do, checking out every single woman who entered the restaurant who was not wearing a wedding ring. They would sigh as each beautiful woman entered and say, "Oh, how could I meet her?" Then the one single guy said to the other, "You know what our problem is?" "Well, no," said the other guy. "What's our problem?" Well, the first single guy then replied to the second, "We're a couple of fives looking for a couple of tens." Well, of course, we all laughed. But that is so true for so many singles. They are looking for a man of valor, a 10, or a woman of virtue, a 10, but they themselves are not a 10. Here's the point. What if when you find that person of valor or virtue, a 10, that person does not find you to be a person of valor or virtue, a 10? The bottom line is you must focus on yourself, not on a relationship. Are you a 10 in valor or virtue? Come on, be honest. Or are you a 5 trying to attract that 10? Since we've already discussed what a man of valor is in the previous lesson, perhaps the question that needs to be asked is, what is a woman of virtue? As we examine the third chapter of this case study, we will attempt to draw out the qualities of a woman of virtue that every single godly man is looking for. So let's return to the text and view it from the perspective of what every single godly man wants. Godly men want God's intervention. God's intervention comes in some pretty mysterious ways. We expect it to come with a trumpet, fanfare, and red carpet treatment, but more often than not, it comes subtly without any hype or fanfare. The case study resumes in a curious way. It simply says, "one day." This is similar to the second chapter where the case study says, as it turned out, she found herself working in the field belonging to Boaz. It may have seemed like a random, accidental, pick of the straw chance happening, but in fact, God was really working behind the scenes. In a similar way, this chapter starts with what appears to be just a random, ordinary day, when it says, "one day." But this would be no ordinary day. As it turns out, this will be a pivotal day in the lives of 3 key single people in this study. The point must not be missed that you never know what a day will bring forth. So, one day Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what Naomi was doing at this point in the case study. You might say that before there was Neil Warren Clark's eHarmony, there was Naomi's B-Harmony, Bible harmony. And just like God, who brought Adam and Eve together, Naomi was tactfully matchmaking. In all likelihood, Naomi had noted everything that Ruth had said about her continued interactions with Boaz in the field and at lunch each day. Naomi had put together Boaz's actions from her reports. She knows that he had more than a casual interest in Ruth. Naomi had to be thinking that these two are a match. She's thinking what the two of them may not have been thinking, or perhaps what the two of them had hoped for but would not bring themselves to talk about out loud. Godly men want to date with a purpose. As Naomi pondered this, she came up with a strategy on how to get a man. Now, this is important. You go about courtship and dating either with or without a strategy. When you do so without a strategy, you are using the random accidental approach. Now, what that means is that you have no target or goal at which you are aiming, and consequently you have no strategy by which to arrive at the intended destination. Most daters believe that they will know what they want when they find it. But how can you find it when you don't know what it is? How can you strategize when you don't have a goal at which to aim? Now, it is true that it was God's providence that brought the two into the same field. But once in the same field, they needed a strategy. When you develop a strategy, you are using what I call the deliberate intentional approach to dating. This deliberate intentional approach to dating was developed thoroughly in the Living Single Again DVD video series. It is called purpose-driven dating. That simply means that the dater has an intentional goal or purpose for dating. The dater knows what he or she wants from a date before ever going on a date. He or she also has a strategy to get to the goal. There are both appropriate goals and inappropriate goals. The non-Christian dater's goal may simply be to get lucky or to score, while the Christian will have an entirely different goal. The bullseye, or the target at which the Christian aims, has written on it 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Dating falls into the category of whatever you do. For the Christian, the foremost goal of dating is to please God on every date. There is so much more you need to determine before you date. What does God want for me? What are the absolutes that I want and I won't fudge on? What are my preferences, things that I prefer, but I'm willing to concede on? You see, the absolutes of God and your absolutes must never be compromised, while your preferences may be. If you wait until you date to figure out what you want in a mate, it will be too late. Infatuation will take you where you really do not want to go. In a similar way, Naomi told Ruth that she had a goal for her when she asked, "Should I not try to find for you a home where you will be well provided for?" Provision and protection were huge things for women back in the days of the judges. The truth is, they still are today. Naomi's strategy started with identifying the kind of man that would fit that bill. In order to broach the subject with Ruth, Naomi asked a rhetorical question. It's rhetorical because Naomi had already told Ruth that Boaz was kin earlier. So she now asks, "Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours?" Now, once Naomi put Boaz on the table for discussion, she made her next move in her well-thought-out strategy. That move had to do with timing. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Her strategy also had a rather bizarre plan. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. Naomi appears to have thought hard on this and developed a detailed plan. She must have said to herself, "Well, Boaz has only seen Ruth covered in dirt and debris from gleaning in the fields. He has only seen the side of her as a field laborer, sweating it out in the hot summer sun and dressed in work clothes. He needs to see the prettier side of Ruth." Well, of course, the harvest was over, and it was time to thresh the crops. That meant Boaz and the other men would be threshing all day and then celebrating in the evening. They would even sleep at the threshing floor with the grain throughout the night to protect it until daylight. As the wheels spun in Naomi's mind, idea after idea came to her. Her strategy was to place Ruth in the best possible light before Boaz so he would see her in a whole new way. Naomi may not have intended to come across as a bossy mother-in-law, but she had already had a history of it. Remember how she was bossing both Orpah and Ruth to go back to Moab in the first chapter of this case study? Well, here she goes again, bossing Ruth to carry out Naomi's plan. Naomi orders Ruth to wash herself, to perfume herself, to put on her best clothes, to go where Boaz was, to conceal herself. And she adds, note where Boaz was, go to Boaz, uncover Boaz's feet, lie down by Boaz, listen to Boaz. Naomi has not simply suggested that Ruth take an interest in Boaz, she has laid out the plan. Naomi's repetitive use of the imperatives indicates that she was not merely suggesting to Ruth, but actually giving her orders. You might say we see Naomi being a little bossy again. So how does a woman of virtue respond to a bossy mother-in-law? Well, she listens with respect and she says, I will do whatever you say. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Ruth responded with humble submission by yielding to the demands of her mother-in-law. She yielded herself to Naomi's will, not just in word. She actually carried out the plan. She was submissive. Now, submission to God is one thing, and submission of one woman to another woman is still another thing. But in our culture today, neither one is as explosive as suggesting that a woman submit to her man. That thought causes nearly all women today to cringe. But why? Perhaps women cringe because of an overbearing man in the past, or perhaps from having been brought up under the influence of the modern women's movement. Still, submission was the quality of this virtuous woman, and it is still the quality of a virtuous woman today. Ruth not only possessed a submissive spirit to Naomi, but as will be seen, to Boaz as well. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was good in spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. Godly men want a lot of respect. Her submissive attitude towards Boaz showed up more as respect than anything else. She postured herself to respect him. You see, a servant would lie down at the master's feet and would be ready for any command from the master. So when Naomi told Ruth to lie down at Boaz's feet, she told her to go to him in a totally humble, submissive, and respectful way. In fact, the expression at his feet occurs 25 times in the NIV Bible and is always used to show respect. You see, the most desired quality that every single godly man wants in his woman is the virtue of respect. Not only do men want this, God demands it of all married women. In Ephesians 5, it says this, "The wife must respect her husband. This is not optional. She must. It is in fact unconditional." Now that means it must be a gracious act on the part of the woman. She is to offer respect as unearned, unmerited, unconditional, with no strings attached. A wife is to offer it even when he does not deserve it. That is so countercultural. Yet it is so biblical. In our modern feminist culture, there does seem to be a double standard. Women expect men to earn respect, and if a man does something undeserving of it, she has every right to withhold it. At the same time, women do not expect to have to earn his love. Well, why? Well, women just expect men to love them unconditionally, even if they are unlovely, and rightfully so. Ephesians says, regarding men, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself. However, some women believe that men must rightfully love unconditionally, but for some mysterious reason do not feel that they should unconditionally respect their husbands as the Bible says for them to do. The wife must respect her husband. For a wife to demand that her husband earn her respect would be like a man demanding his wife earn his love. Both are wrong. Both men and women are to offer unconditionally the love and respect that the other so desperately wants and needs. Now this is huge. Emerson Eggrichs, in his book, Love and Respect, says respect is a man's deepest value. He backed that statement up with some research that he summarizes in this way. In one national study, 400 men were given a choice between going through two negative experiences. If they were forced to choose one of the following, which would they prefer to endure? A, to be left alone and unloved in the world, or B, to feel inadequate and disrespected by everyone. 74% of those men said that if they were forced to choose, they would prefer being alone and unloved in the world. The vast majority of men, nearly 3/4, chose to go without love because the foremost desire of the vast majority of men is for women to respect them. The respect is viewed by a godly man as a sign of her humble submission to God and him. Now, returning to the case study, we find Boaz was startled in the night only to discover a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." Notice that when asked, "Who are you?" Ruth called herself one of Boaz's servants. She took both the posture and the title of a servant to show her profound respect for him. After identifying herself, Ruth continued immediately by saying one of the most curious things. "Spread the corner of your garment over me." Now, what was that all about? Did she want to sleep with him? And if so, how could she be called a virtuous woman? Well, of course she was not asking to sleep with him. The phrase, "spread your covering," is descriptive of a covenant of marriage. This same imagery will be used later by Ezekiel to describe the Lord God's marriage to the nation Israel. So Ruth was proposing to Boaz, or perhaps a little more accurately, she was proposing that Boaz proposed to her. Quickly she added the justification for her proposal that he proposed to her. "Since you are my kinsman redeemer." This position of a kinsman redeemer was established by God in the law of Moses. You might say Ruth was getting biblical to keep everything on the up and up. Without getting too sidetracked on a kinsman redeemer, let's just say that a kinsman redeemer in the time of the judges had two major responsibilities. One, to buy back relatives who had been sold into slavery and to buy back their property as well. And two, to marry the widow of your nearest kin if she was childless. The details of this will come to play later in the case study. For now, the fact that Ruth has summoned the biblical principle of a kinsman redeemer requires that Boaz act heroically as a man of valor. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. Boaz responded with a prayer of blessing. Now think about it. A younger woman all dolled up, wearing a little bit of that Moab potion number 9, comes to a single guy in the middle of the night saying, "Whatever you tell me to do, I will do." Well, he stopped to pray. Yes, to pray. The prayer here is in the form of a blessing. It is an invocation of God to visit Ruth with a blessing. Now, in a normal prayer, the person praying takes someone else before God in prayer. But in a blessing, the prayer goes to God and asks God to visit the other person with the blessing. Let me suggest that praying is a great way to handle temptation. It is very difficult to act on temptation when you are earnestly praying. Hebrews 2:18 tells us that Jesus is able to help those who are being tempted. Again, in Hebrews 4, it adds to this, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet without sin. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." Jesus will help us if we will go to Him for His help. This is a great idea for dating people. Pray on your dates. Prayer time can be more intimate than a goodbye kiss. When two dating people pray, honestly from their hearts, they reveal who they truly are before God. They share their true heart's passions and desires. If you want to really know if the other person is a person of valor or virtue, just listen to his or her prayers. They tell all. Well, then Boaz added, "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after younger men, whether rich or poor." Godly men want unfailing love. Boaz referred to Ruth's kindness. The word for kindness is frequently translated unfailing love. Several ideas are bound up in this word. The first idea is a love based in a covenant commitment. The second is a love that is faithful to that covenant commitment. The third is a love that endures forever. These three aspects are what every godly single man desires in a woman. If a man is not interested in these qualities, it's a good sign that he's just not a godly single man. But Boaz was. Boaz said that Ruth's present unfailing love was greater than that which she had showed earlier. So when did Ruth show such unfailing love earlier? Well, perhaps Boaz was referring to chapter 2, verse 11, where he said, "But I also know about your love and kindness you have shown to your mother-in-law since the death of your husband." Now that statement actually rests on the covenant promise of verses 1, 16, and 17. There Ruth promised under oath, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." Ruth's unfailing love was bound by a covenant. She had been faithful to it, and Boaz was aware that she meant it for life. But now this new unfailing love toward Boaz was greater than the earlier one. What was this new unfailing love? It was simply that she accepted Boaz, warts and all. Godly men want to be accepted. Being accepted is another aspect of the virtuous woman that every single godly man wants. Every single godly man wants to be accepted for who he is. In Boaz's case, it was to be accepted in spite of his age. There's no doubt that Boaz was significantly older than Ruth. He had repeatedly called her my daughter. That Ruth would propose to him, that he proposed to her, was unimaginable to him. He had precluded that he was too old to be considered by her. He must have pinched himself a couple of times to be sure that he was not dreaming up this visit from Ruth. She accepted him for who he was, age and all. Boaz continued his conversation with her. "Now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character." Boaz relieved any fear that Ruth may have had that he might reject her. On top of all of that, he offered to do all she requested. That meant he would propose to her. Then Boaz gave the grounds for his action. She was a woman of equally good reputation to his own. What we have here are two tens who are planning to get married. Godly men want equality. Every single godly man is looking for equality in a woman. Not equality of sexes. He's not looking for a macho woman. No, the equality he's looking for is a spiritual equality. He's looking for a godly single woman. He knows he won't find her in a bar hopping scene, and in all likelihood, he will find her in church worshiping and serving God. Boaz had apparently waited for the right woman to come along, and perhaps due to his old age, had even given up on the idea that he would meet the right one. He wanted a woman of noble character, equal to his own, and wouldn't settle for less. Every single godly man wants a virtuous woman, a woman equally virtuous to his own valor, or more so. And that's what Boaz was getting in Ruth. You see, both Boaz and Ruth were described by the same Hebrew word translated valor. When used of the male gender, it's called valor. And when used of the female gender, it's called virtue. In fact, they equally shared this quality. Neither one said, "Anyone will do, all I need is a spouse." The reason that neither would settle for less was because they themselves were people of valor or virtue. Sadly, not all today are willing to wait long enough for the right person, that person of valor or virtue, to enter their life. Too many settle for less. Settling for less is a sure sign that you are not a person of valor or virtue. On the other hand, waiting on God to bring the right person into your life is a sure sign that you are a person of valor or virtue. Ruth's virtue was equal to Boaz's, and everyone knew it. Ruth had developed a reputation of being virtuous. Nothing has changed today. Everyone has a reputation. Before seriously dating, you need to discover the reputation of the stranger who just walked into your life. That reputation will be the first clue to whether or not he or she is a person of valor or virtue. What is the person's reputation according to those who really know him or her? Finding the answer to that question will go a long way in sorting out who is the right person and who is not. In my years of dealing with singles, I have been approached by virtuous women who have asked, What I know about a certain eligible single man. Are they a man of integrity? On certain occasions, I've had to say, honestly, you can do better than that. That was a polite way of saying, no, they're not. Godly men want to solve relationship glitches. In the real world, every relationship has its glitch. But this case study was too fairy tale perfect. Everything was going too right. No one's life goes this smoothly. And then that's true. And it was true for Boaz and Ruth as well. Boaz added, but there is one problem. Although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Obstacles in relationships are universal. Every relationship has its bumps, roadblocks, and detours that present difficulties to it. The obstacle set before Boaz and Ruth was huge because someone else could claim Naomi's property and take the bride ahead of Boaz. Naomi was aware of this, but she obviously did not inform Ruth. Naomi had hinted to it back in chapter 2, verse 20. Regarding Boaz, she said, he is one of our kinsman redeemers. Did you notice the plural? Boaz was just one of the kinsman redeemers. What Naomi had dismissed or even perhaps deemed as insignificant had now become a major problem. Often it's the insignificant things that become huge obstacles later. Every relationship has to have an obstacle. You see, the obstacle serves the purpose of affording an opportunity to demonstrate how each will handle a crisis or conflict. The obstacle shows up differently for different couples. For one couple, the obstacle may be an unaccepting parent or an unaccepting child. For another, it may be a financial burden or a health issue or a religious conviction. Obstacles appear in relationships in order to test the couple with respect to their ability to solve problems and enrich the relationship. Boaz followed up the bad news that there was a nearer kinsman redeemer with some compassionate good news. He said, stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. He invited her to stay because it was not safe to go home in the dark. At daylight, she would be much safer making the trip back to Naomi. The words that follow the invitation seem a little strange or harsh, but in reality, they are not. He said, if he, the other kinsman redeemer, wants to redeem you, good, let him redeem. How could Boaz have asserted that it would be good? Boaz could only do so because he accepted that it was God's sovereign hand that directed all the affairs of his life. This man of valor was willing to yield to God's sovereign plan. Boaz knew that if God's master plan called for placing Ruth into the arms of another nearer kinsman redeemer, then that would be fine with him. How could it be fine? Just remember that Boaz and Ruth have not crossed steps 6 to 7 of the 12 steps of bonding a relationship for life. As will be seen later, step 7 is the great divide. Intimate kissing begins at step 7, and so does deep emotional involvement. Breaking up after crossing over step 7 is like a divorce or death all over again. But Boaz and Ruth had not gotten emotionally, physically, or sexually involved. As a result of that, even if the relationship should come to an end, neither one of them would have been severely crushed. Disappointed? Yes. Crushed? No. Why? Well, it was because neither one of them would have been ripped apart with chunks of each going with the other. That's because neither one crossed the line between steps 6 and 7. There is a lesson here to be learned. If you cross from step 6 to 7 in a relationship and the relationship goes sour, you will experience all the emotional pain that comes from the loss of a relationship. It will be just as if another separation by divorce or death occurred. If, however, you don't cross the line between steps 6 and 7 and the relationship doesn't work out, you will not experience the pain from the loss of a relationship to such a severe degree. Godly men want trust. Couched in the language that Boaz used is the notion that he wanted Ruth to trust him on this one. This is yet another aspect of the virtuous woman that every single godly man wants. He wants a woman that will trust him and believe in him. Boaz appeared to be saying, there's an obstacle, but trust me, I'll handle it. And trust him is what Ruth did. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, Don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. Boaz was such a man of valor that he would not have done anything that could be considered an impropriety or an immoral act. He would not have taken advantage of her. Boaz did remark that Ruth needed to keep their meeting a secret, even though neither one had done anything wrong. He didn't want anyone to know their relationship had become very serious. He was not trying to hide the relationship. He was just a very shrewd man with a strategy to handle the obstacle at hand. In all likelihood, he deemed that public knowledge of his interest in Ruth would have only jeopardized his strategy. It would tip his hand and give the other, nearer kinsman redeemer, the upper hand in the negotiation for the right of redemption. Ruth had to trust his judgment on this and not question him. In order to prove his integrity and show her that he would do all that she had asked, he offered her a token. He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and put it on her, and then he went back to town. Both Boaz and Ruth had left the threshing floor. Boaz went back to town, and Ruth went back to her mother-in-law. Of course, Ruth's return meant that she would be bombarded with a gazillion questions from Naomi about what had happened. Her return went like this. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her, and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Can you imagine all the chatter as Ruth told her everything in detail? Can you imagine Naomi's relief when she learned that her strategy had actually worked? Boaz proved himself to be truly a man of valor, who upheld his integrity when opportunity was afforded to take advantage of Ruth. Of all the things Ruth said to Naomi in that conversation, only one is recorded in this case study for us. It was recorded that Boaz gave her 6 measures of barley, saying, "Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed." The divine caseworker included this so we would know that Boaz wisely was courting the bitter mother-in-law as well as Ruth. Now this is important. You don't just date the person alone, you date the entire family. You can't get one without the other. You cannot separate your date from his or her family. It's a package deal. Naomi understood that Boaz was courting her as well as Ruth because he was keenly interested in marrying Ruth. She could read people. Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Godly men want a patient woman. Naomi knew men well enough to know that now was the time to be relatively patient. That is, patient enough to give Boaz the time he needed to eliminate the obstacle. Naomi knew men are, by nature, problem solvers. She knew in her heart that Boaz had a problem and that he would immediately set out to resolve it. He just needed a little time. This is another aspect of the virtuous woman that every single godly man wants. He wants a woman who can be patient with him. He wants a woman who will give him the time to address the issue at hand and allow him to solve the matter in his own way. That often requires patience on the part of the woman, especially when she has her own plan in mind. Now, be careful here, not to be confused. Not all relationships are going somewhere. Naomi knew that Boaz would settle the matter as quickly as possible. She is not suggesting patience without limits on a man who will not make a commitment to the relationship or do something about it. Too many singles are patiently waiting on someone who is all talk and no action, or on someone who dates but will not commit. Naomi knew from Ruth's report of everything that Boaz had said that Boaz had promised to redeem Ruth if the nearer kinsman redeemer would not do it. Knowing Boaz's integrity, Naomi was confident that he would certainly act as quickly as possible. Still, patience was required to give Boaz the time he needed to eliminate the obstacle. Godly men want to contemplate marriage. It's worth noticing that Boaz and Ruth were contemplating marriage and had only gone through steps 1 through 6 of the 12 steps in bonding a relationship for life. Of those 6 steps, steps 4 through 6 had focused on worldviews and the compatibility of the two. Steps 7 through 9 focused on facing each other. During the previous steps, the couple was postured side by side and looked together outwardly toward the world. They were sharing worldviews to see if they were compatible. Now, steps 7 through 9, the couple looks towards each other. The focus is more on nonverbal than on the verbal communication. Intimate kissing takes place at this point, and it is the first step that introduces sexual arousal to the courting process. The relationship tends to move away from the intellectual process of verbal communications regarding worldviews and moves towards an emotional and passionate process. Although sexual arousal takes place, there is no sexual contact during steps 7 through 9. Step 7 is called mouth to mouth. It focuses on intimate kissing. Prior to this, only casual greeting kind of kiss has taken place. But now intimate kissing takes place to prepare the couple for sex. Verbal communications and the intellectual side of the relationship slow down as both emotions and passions pick up and take over. A huge warning sign with a border of flashing lights needs to be posted at step 7 that says, "Warning, when a couple moves from step 6 to step 7, they significantly increase the amount of pain they will experience upon a breakup of the relationship." Should a couple cross from 6 to 7 and then break up, huge chunks of each person are ripped from them and they go with the other person. This is similar to what happens in a separation, divorce, and death. People do not simply separate with a clean cut. No, divorce and death are both very rough and painful, jagged, tearing apart of two united lives. Pieces of each go with the other because they have emotionally and passionately given a part of themselves that they cannot take back. The same is true for dating couples who go beyond steps 6 to 7. Rarely do people in the relationship after step 7 maintain a friendship. The breakup will always be viewed as just too painful. However, those who break up before step 7 can go on to become best friends for life. So much is at stake here. Boaz and Ruth did not cross step 7. So even if the other nearer kinsman redeemer were to step in and claim his rights, neither Boaz and Ruth would have been totally crushed. In fact, both would have been able to accept it with valor and virtue as the good hand of the true and living God's providential care for them. Step 8 is called hand to head. This step involves touching of the face, stroking of the hair, tracing the edge of the ear, or cradling the head in one's lap. All are touches to the head, which is considered our most vulnerable part of our body. To allow someone to touch the head indicates a profound trust of that person. Step 9 is called hand to body because at this step there is a profound respect for the other person's body. This is not done in a sexual way, but out of respect for the configuration of the other person's total makeup. This includes imperfections and idiosyncrasies that are accepted, even appreciated, because they make that person who they are. Obviously, Boaz and Ruth saved all the steps of 7 through 12 for marriage. What they did is not our cultural norm. In our 21st century practice, at least among Christians, the practice is to go through all the steps up to 9 and reserve 10 through 12 for marriage. The non-Christians in our culture rarely reserve anything for marriage. They often move in and cohabit, even though such actions increase the likelihood of divorce by around 50% more when they do marry, according to media reports by credible university studies. Hollywood and TV and entertainment industries all promote steps 1 through 3, skipping steps 4 through 9, and picking up with steps 10 through 12 in nearly every romance movie, sitcom, and reality show. Their version goes like this. Scene 1, guy meets girl. Scene 2, guy and girl are in bed together. It's no wonder those relationships don't last. They have not bonded for life. Donald Joy writes, in Desmond Morris's book, Intimate Behavior, he reports that the 12 steps in pair bonding tend to be present in all human cultures. He notes that a variation from the 12 steps tends to move people towards more violent sexual behavior. Morris cautions that when steps are missed, in the rush to genital intimacy, the bond tends to be deformed and to break. The last 3 steps are all intended for marriage because they are sexual in nature. They need little clarification and are as follows. Step 10 is called mouth to breast. The intimate kissing that started at step 7 was the beginning of sexual arousal. Such arousal, when peaked, will ultimately lead to foreplay and the caressing of the breasts that is characterized by step 10. Step 11 is called handed genital. With sexual arousal underway, the hand spontaneously seeks out and caresses the final source of pleasure. Step 12 is called genital to genital. With both fully aroused, sexual penetration in the act of marriage takes place. It is clear from the case study that Boaz and Ruth were saving all of steps 7 through 12 for marriage. What are you saving?